Welcome to Behind the Badge. This podcast aims to improve the health and well-being of frontline workers. Each episode features candid conversations with former and current frontline community members and subject matter experts. Join us as we explore the unique nature of serving in high-risk roles, sharing inspiring stories of resilience, strategies, and resources. We are not qualified health professionals, nor are we aligned with any organization. The opinions expressed in the podcast are solely our own. Additionally, the content may evoke strong emotional responses for some. Listener discretion is advised.
I don't wanna promise that we have an answer. And I don't wanna promise that we know.
G'day everyone, welcome back. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. If you're enjoying Behind the Badge, make sure you hit subscribe or leave us a rating on whatever platform you're listening. Not only does this help us grow the podcast, but it ensures that you don't miss any future episodes and conversations like this one. Today's guest, Kate Duncan, never set out to become a firefighter or paramedic, but life's twists and turns led her deep into frontline service in both the US and Australia. Along the way, she experienced the highs of camaraderie and purpose, and the lows of burnout, trauma, and self-diagnosed PTSD. Even before those challenges, Kate had begun exploring mindfulness and meditation, practices that became vital when the weight of the job caught up with her. What started as part of her personal growth evolved into a lifeline, and eventually into a program she now shares with other frontline workers. In this episode, Kate opens up about the path from chaos to stillness, and what it means to rebuild a life shaped by both service and healing. Let's do it. Welcome to the show, Kate Duncan.
Thank you.
Good to have you here after, an extended period of time trying to tee it up. It's nice to finally to get this done.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's all good. We appreciate it. Let's kick off the early life of Kate Duncan. Where did you grow up? How did you grow up?
I was born in Port Lincoln, South Australia, which is pretty remote. And my parents divorced when I was about 7. And so then I spent the rest of my childhood on the little farm in rural SA. And it was probably one of those towns that you just never really want to go back to. And so late in high school, I started kind of fantasizing about getting far, far, far away. And that led me to seeing an ad to be an au pair, a nanny. And so as soon as high school finished, I went off to the States to be an au pair.
Sweet. So was your family always involved in farming?
They weren't really involved in farming. It was a little hobby farm. My dad actually owned car dealerships when we were young, and my stepdad was in radio. And so when the divorce happened, we moved to Adelaide right away, and then my mum met my stepdad, and he was in radio in Port Pirie. And that's like a little tiny lead smelting town in rural SA. And so they just found a little property, and they never really farmed it. They had share farmers. But yeah, we had that sort of country lifestyle. We had heaps of olive trees and like a dam, a freshwater dam we'd swim in. And so we had a pretty going camping kind of a childhood, hanging out outside kind of a childhood for sure.
In the lead up, you said something about wanting to get out of that environment. So what was that? It sounds pretty awesome.
The farm we lived on was pretty awesome, and the town was not so awesome.
Right.
I think I always remember having kind of this feeling of like, even though I was still a teenager, this idea of like, I don't really understand the way these people think, and there's got to be a bit more going on in life. I've maybe always had that way of thinking, and I wanted to go do something. My older sister had been an exchange student in Minnesota in the States, and my older brother had gone over there to do like a camp. You know those Camp Americas?
Oh yeah, summer camps and...
Yeah, summer camp. He did that on the East Coast. And so I didn't want to go to the States. I actually wanted to go to the UK, but I had heard that the conditions, like the working conditions in the States were better. So in the end, I got a family in San Jose, California, which is near San Francisco. And they basically bribed me to come by saying they were going to take me to Maui as soon as I arrived. So I was like, all right, I'm in.
Done deal. So did you finish year 12 before you went over and did that job?
Yep, I did. Yeah, I was a stellar student. I did physics, chemistry, biology, maths. I was actually enrolled into a university degree, and I deferred it for a year. Thank goodness, because the degree was something like a double degree in engineering and science and biotech or something horrendous, like working in
Wow.
a lab. Yeah. I think I was always medically inclined, but yeah, didn't really necessarily want to be a doctor. So
Yeah, cool.
yeah.
How obviously your parents were used to their kids going over to the States. So by the time you got there, it was probably a bit of status quo, I imagine.
Oh, look, I think my mum was still Devo, but she's the kind of mum that would always tell me or us that whatever we wanted to do, even if we wanted to be a hairdresser and stay in Port Pirie, was totally fine with her. So I never felt any expectations or pressure from my mum. She's a pretty top-notch woman.
So what year was that you went over to the States as au pair, and how long did that job role last?
Yeah. So end of 99, I graduated 99, left in 2000. And had I known I was going to be gone 15 years, I doubt I would have had the courage to get on the plane, but I was gone 15 years. I was only a nanny with that family for just over a year. Towards the end of the year, I met a man and fell wildly in love, as you do when you're 19. And then the year was up, and with visas, etc., you have to go home. And geez, I can't believe I'm going to admit this on the podcast. So we went and got married.
Oh, that doesn't happen, does it?
Yes. We could not face up to the idea of breaking up, and the only other option on our budget was to get married. So we went to San Francisco City Hall and we got married.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what age was that? 19. Is that
Yep. Oh,
19?
barely. Yeah,
Wow.
barely. And interestingly, that is how I came to know about emergency services, because he was a whitewater kayaker. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with him, actually, because he took me out to Yosemite National Park and took me camping. And I'd been a nanny in like the city, San Francisco, San Jose, it's a big city. And we went out camping, and it was like my childhood all over again. And yeah, and then he had this whole group of really incredible friends because he was a whitewater kayaker. And I don't know if Australia doesn't really have that, but in California, there's huge mountains and they drain out every spring. And there's some of the world's best kayaking is actually in California. And his girlfriend, Gina, who became my absolute best friend, and I was at her children's birth, etc. She was a kayaker, but she was also a San Francisco firefighter paramedic. And so that was how I first touched into that profession.
Sweet. And so you had that exposure to her, and then what did the journey look like into being a firefighter paramedic in the States, especially as a foreigner as well?
Yeah. Well, so once I was married, I then filed all the paperwork to become a permanent resident. So, and so then then I was still nannying. I was still a nanny up. My husband actually moved to San Francisco, so I went up, followed him, and became a nanny up there. Um, and then we both noticed that Gina was never working. I would ask her, like, what, you never work? Actually, San Francisco firefighters only work 8 days a month because their job is so intense. So she only worked 8 days a month, and 24-hour.
Yeah.
Pretty much every department in the States is 24-hour shifts or 48 hours. And I just said, I want to do that, because my mind had always been medically, there's always a medical pull for me. And I thought if I become a paramedic here in the States, because at that time I still thought we were going to move back to Australia in a couple of years. I didn't want to live in the States. I wasn't interested. It was more about I'd met this man, I loved him, I got married, and I wanted to get him back to Australia. And I thought, and I'd always been studious. So I thought if I become a paramedic here, then that's something I can take back with me to Australia, etc. And so I asked him, do you have any interest in taking an EMT class with me? Because that's kind of the first step over there. It's called emergency medical technician, and you just go to a community college and it's a semester class. And he said yes. So I actually, my husband and I, we decided we didn't want to live in the city, in San Francisco area anymore. He got a job at a kayak shop up in Sacramento, and we moved up there and enrolled in an EMT course. So I would have been probably still in that 19, 20 age, I think, pretty sure. My husband, I realize now, much like my current husband, is probably undiagnosed ADHD. And so he just had a photographic memory. I would study and study and study and study, and then we'd show up and get the same results in our EMT tests. But he pretty quickly realized he didn't actually want to do that. And yet I fell in love. The instructor of our EMT course was a firefighter paramedic at the Sacramento Metro Fire Department. And he was just such an impressive man. And I just was like, I want to be like that guy. And that's how it happened.
Did you have any other influences growing up before that meeting Gina that might have influenced your decision to go that way, or even like that medical sort of pool that you spoke about?
My first instinct is to say absolutely no, that I didn't even know that existed. It was never even in my radar. I do remember an ambulance coming out to my primary school and just thinking, ugh, like I'm not going in that ambulance. But I think the pull is not about ambulance or fire. I think the pull for me is this innate sense of wanting to do good in the world. You're both nodding. Yep.
Yep.
And that's really strong in me, and maybe too strong. And, we can get to that later, but that sort of wanting to change the world, wanting to save the world, wanting to make everything and everyone better is a pretty strong pull in me, I've come to realize as an adult.
When you took on that role, like, was it meeting your needs? Like, you said that, you want to help people, and did you second guess the decision at some point, or was it like, this is me?
No, I did second guess the decision. I did. And I wondered too if my heart was always a bit too open for that role, and that might be how I ended up, or where I ended up. Because I did second guess it. I remember being in the EMT class and looking at, like a picture of a burned child and thinking, I'm not sure. But that drive to help was such that I felt confident that, it would be okay. Whatever I would see would be fine because I would be helping. And I felt quite passionate about it. And I would say there was always little doubts, but the desire and the curiosity, I think I would say, the curiosity to see what was this whole world about very much overran any doubts that I had.
So EMT course, semester long.
Yep.
Pass that with flying colours due to all your study and all the hard work you put into it. Where to from there?
Yeah, okay. So in California, so something that is really different from Australia to the States, it's worth mentioning probably, is that in Australia, everything's quite regulated and, departments are kind of statewide and systems run the same. Even from state to state, they basically run the same. In the States, it's just the opposite. Every state has completely different legislations and the way that they run EMS. Or EMS is like, emergency medical services, police, fire, ambulance. So in California, I would say almost all of the fire departments, other than volunteers, staff paramedics. And many of them run their own ambulances. Some are like the fire engines, staff, paramedics and EMTs, but then they outsource to a private ambulance company. So it's very different depending on what state and what county you're in and what city you're in, very different. So what I did is became an EMT. And at this point, I had no desire to be a firefighter, like at all. Didn't want to. I actually had made that decision. I don't really want to be a firefighter. I just want to become a paramedic. And then, of course, by then I'll probably move back to Australia and transfer over. So EMT, the first thing you have to do on your kind of pathway to being a paramedic is go and just get a job in what's called patient transport. So you're not going to get into the 911 system right away. You need experience first in patient transport, and that's going to, much like probably is here, going to psychiatric facilities and elderly care facilities, and then also taking like paraplegics, for example, from hospital back to their homes after appointments and stuff like that. And man, was that a shock. That was such a shock. And I think that was the point where I went, whoa, hold on. Like, not only do I want to do this, but some big questions about life arose. I think in Australia, maybe it's not as extreme, but in the States, the level of like disrepair inside some of these nursing homes, and it was like low-key soul crushing even at that point. And I don't think I really knew that my soul was so crushed until many, many, many years later. But it was a shock. It was a shock to think that people just abandon their quadriplegic family members and leave them in disgusting homes with terrible care and put the elderly in these horrible, horrible places. You just walk in. I mean, Australia, by comparison, is like these nursing homes are palaces. Even the can I say shit?
Yeah, you just did.
Even the shit ones are better than California's good ones, you know. And like anything in the States, it's so shit on one end and so nice on the other. And this is true of everything. In the States, even food can be absolutely terrible or it can be absolutely amazing. In Australia, everything's brought to the middle of the spectrum. Our clothing quality is pretty similar from one to the other. Our food quality, our nursing home quality, we don't have these extremes. It's same politically. We don't have as extreme views. But in the States, it's just, you know, you can get the very best or you can have the very worst. So I was pretty flawed in that year. That was a tough year for sure. But then I lucked out. The company that I worked for doing transfers, which by the way ended up going through a class action lawsuit because their practices were so horrendous. They used to pay us 14 hours out of the 24 hours only. And then at night, you would only get paid if you did a certain number of calls. But then the way he structured it, the owner, you pretty much never got paid at night.
Oh, no.
So in the end, I think when we calculated it, we were making something like $4 an hour. He managed to win a 911 contract in a city called Stockton, California. And I spent some time writing a book about being a paramedic, and I looked up all the statistics in Stockton. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but the homicide rate is like about the highest in the country, and you know, stabbing, shooting, the whole thing. So I began my my sort of start as a paramedic down in Stockton, California, with that kind of environment. So
Well, it sounds.
there because I didn't talk about actually becoming a paramedic, but
Was there more study involved in becoming a paramedic?
So got the EMT, worked at this company. I probably won't give them a name. Worked for them as an EMT while I was going through paramedic school. And so I chose to go to a private paramedic school, which is where you pay a lot more money, but it's a lot faster and it's just compressed. You're only learning about being a paramedic. You're not taking any general education, etc. And so I got the whole thing done almost in a year because you do the didactic portion, which is about 9 months, and then you get an internship. But I started my hospital internship a little bit early. So you do an internship in the hospital and you do the rounds. You do the ED, you do operating room to intubate, you do labor and delivery. I can't remember, a few different things, mental health. And then you go out and you do an on-road internship. And I met my on-road internship, they're called a preceptor, in the hospital when he would come in, and just grabbed him right away and said, I want to do my internship with you. So I didn't have any gaps. And hospital on-road internship was fantastic. He was a really great preceptor. And got that all done. Now, there's a big spanner in the works that happened halfway through my paramedic thing, like basically as I was starting my internships, which is that I got a DUI. I was a big drinker when I was young, and loved to party. And we'd just finished the didactic portion, and everybody wanted to go out for drinks. And I didn't live in the town that I went to school. I commuted 30 minutes. And so I said, no, I'm not going to, because there's no way to get home. And I actually went home. And then my husband called and said he wasn't coming back from his work trip. And I got, as you do when we were getting towards the end of our marriage at this point, and I was really mad at him. And I decided, now, I was already in bed in my pajamas and the boys were all texting, come for drinks. And against my better judgment, I decided I was going for drinks. And so I went up there and I had what I thought was probably an okay amount. And around midnight, I decided to go home, and I blew .08 and I got a DUI.
How does that affect your paramedic?
Yeah, so you can't hold an ambulance driver's license with a DUI.
What's is it .05 over there, the legal limit?
It's .08 over there.
Oh, okay. So it was.
Yep.
Wow.
I spent the night in jail. You go to jail when you get a DUI over there. So
Jeez.
Wow.
Quite an experience. And it is true that police officers in the States are not very nice. I had a very unpleasant experience with the officer. I felt a bit like I had been arrested for being a prostitute or something. That was about the level of care I received. So I became very passionate later in life about the way we treat our patients. But yeah, it was a pretty rough experience. But it was good for me in the end. It was really good for me. But you can't hold an ambulance driver's license with a DUI, and it's in fact a 1-year ban. So I was looking at how's this going to work? And I pretty quickly called my boss and I told him what happened. And I said, at that point, I was still working patient transport in Sacramento, right? And so when you work patient transport, obviously you're working with 2 EMTs. One drives one call, and then the next call you switch, the other drives the other one. And so I said, can I keep my job and I'll just take every call? And interestingly, he said yes. And also, we could probably, oh, that's right. So I had wanted to go down to Stockton to work in the night. I had been asking to go down to Stockton to work into the 911 system as an EMT. And they said that would be okay. However, because I got the DUI, I wouldn't be able to do that because the paramedics take all the calls mostly. So I stayed in Sacramento until my paramedic license was finished. And then he had said, as soon as you become a paramedic, we'll send you down to Stockton and you will just run every single call and you won't drive. So I got very lucky that they kept me. And that is how I ended up in Stockton to begin. But the biggest win that came out of that was that there was a loophole. So when this happened, when I got a DUI, I started talking to everybody about it. And started hearing my friend Gina said, I've got this mate and he had a DUI and he still works for us. And so I was basically calling people and trying to get as much information as I could. And what the loophole was that I found out is that to be a firefighter, you don't need a ambulance driver's license. What you need is a Class B commercial license. And there's no problem with having a Class B commercial driver's license with a DUI on your record. So that, I'm ashamed to admit, is the reason I decided to go down the firefighter route.
Good choice. Very good choice.
Life. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, I haven't talked about this stuff in like 10 years, 15 years.
Well, that's cool. I guess life has a funny way of, putting you on different paths and different avenues. So,
yeah, it also pretty much killed the party lifestyle dead in its tracks. I was like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, am I going to be an adult? Like, am I going to, like, if I'm going to take on this role, this is a pretty serious role, and people are going to trust me with their lives. And I suppose it is time to clean it up and to grow up and to take it seriously. So not only did it push me toward fire, but it pushed me towards putting my big girl pants on.
Well, I guess you're still.
I was young.
I was going to say you were young.
I was young
across all aspects of your life. Married at 19, and so
no family around.
Not really time to have that, sort of adulthood, I guess, or so jumped into life pretty quick.
What does moving into firefighting in the States look like? So once you've done your EMT or your paramedic school, what?
You have to have a DUI first.
Yeah.
So generally, it's generally in order to get a job in California as a firefighter, you would ideally already be a paramedic. They're pretty hesitant to hire an EMT only. You have to be definitely EMT at minimum, but usually a paramedic. There's a lot of EMTs that work in the fire department, but that's because they got hired in 10, 15 years ago. Generally, they want you to be a paramedic. Usually desirable is a 4-year bachelor degree as well, which I did not have. And then most of what it revolves around is your physical fitness. So that still means in the States it's not 50-50 men to women. There was only 7 women in my entire fire department because the entry tests that you have to take are quite difficult. But I was an athlete. I was a whitewater kayaker, so it was like no problem for me at all. So I would ski in the winters. I would mountain bike in the shoulder seasons, and I would whitewater kayak all through spring and summer, like carrying the kayak on the shoulder, hiking in. So it just wasn't a problem. But I definitely would show up at a lot of these tests and there'd be a lot of women, and then you'd get down to the last kind of written test and there'd only be 2 or 3 in the room. So that filled me with the confidence. I know this probably sounds terrible, but that filled me with the confidence that even with the DUI and even without a 4-year degree, I would probably eventually get a job. So I just applied everywhere. And that was kind of my job, just going around to all these tests. Because unlike here, where it's just Brisbane, fire and then SA fire. You've got all these different cities.
Counties and
Even in the San Francisco area alone, there's probably 50 fire departments, right? In the Sacramento area, there's 3. And I had some really, I had one in particular horrendous experience. So once you get through all the testing, then you have background investigators that then come around and look at your whole life. Sometimes they do polygraph tests. And I had the worst experience I've ever had of misogyny and sexism was with a background investigator from Hayward Fire who sat there in the office with me and basically told me that I was going to have sex with everybody in the department, so they weren't going to hire me. Okay, because I was, so the divorce happened, right? Yeah. So basically the DUI and the whole being, all of that was just was kind of the straw that it was really me also deciding I wasn't going to party anymore. That just kind of broke the end of the marriage, and off we went our separate ways. So I was in the middle of kind of testing when that happened. It was a very tough time. Like I was almost coming back to Australia probably on a weekly basis, and would sort of cry to my mum a lot, and she'd say, "Oh, just come home," and da da da. And I said, "Let me just see if I can get into fire departments," because I was in debt. Getting a DUI in the States is extremely expensive. I was making $4 an hour at Stockton paramedic place, and going on stabbings and shootings every day. It was a pretty dark time. But and then I had that experience with that background investigator, and I just cried the whole 2-hour drive back to Sacramento. I was like, do I even want to be in this environment with men like this? And then I already had the background investigator scheduled to come from the place I did get hired, which was called Stillness Fire Department. It's in the southern area of Sacramento. And he came out to my house, and he was the loveliest, kindest man. And I thought, I want to work for this place. And I did. I got a job offer from a man who ended up becoming a really good friend of mine. And he said to me on the phone, "Any more traffic incidents, even a speeding ticket, and you're fired. But we'll hire you." And that was it. And so then you get into a fire academy, which was probably one of the highlights of my life for 6 months or 5 months. And it was full on military. Like the guy that ran our PT was an ex-Navy SEAL. His name, I probably shouldn't say his name, but he come in every morning and he would say, they would never tell us what we were doing. So the day began with PT. We had to get there before the sun came up and make sure the bell was at the top of the 5-story tower before the sun came up. And then he would just make us run, and he'd say, "First person to puke gets a minute break."
Wow.
I don't think many of these things would fly in Australia, but
No.
it was some real cowboy stuff. I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
So even though he was he active firefighter? Same was and the guy doing the background check was active firefighter or just a consultant?
No, they hire, they outsource that to a company. Yeah. But yeah, he was super lovely.
So apart from getting really, really good at running, how did you find the fire academy?
I hate running. I've always hated running. I hated it in the fire academy, but I just did it anyway. I just loved the fire academy. I loved it. I felt like I've always been a tomboyish kind of woman in the sense of I love being out, like fishing. I loved camping. I loved all of that. And I always had a lot of energy. And being in the fire department was just this feeling of, maybe I've always had a strong ego. And so this being in the fire department, just really makes you feel that sense of I'm so important, and you get to run around and we'd put on burns, and we'd, have fake fires, and I don't know, we just loved it. Even doing the ladders, and I loved throwing ladders, and because then in the States, I don't know if you guys do it, you actually put the ladder on your shoulder and then you throw it just single-handedly. Do you guys do that? No. The fire department in the States is, what's the saying we used to joke about? 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. I am still doing vertical ventilation, throwing
Yeah,
ladders
yeah.
one-handed, even though it's all terribly dangerous and you could easily do it with 2 people, but it's just that's what they love to do. Big, big, heavy leather helmets, make your neck sore at the end of the day every time. Guys, we could just
Tradition.
wear those yellow fiberglass ones.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they look
No.
cool.
yeah.
Exactly. So it's all about looking cool and feeling cool. And I think at my young age, that really appealed to me. So I loved it. I just loved it. And I also, I also I loved that like persona of these instructors. They'd go around yelling at everybody, but the boys would kind of believe that the instructors were really that mean. Whereas for me, I'm like, I bet he's a really nice guy. Like, and they'd make us run 5 times up and down the tower if you didn't put your pen in your pocket or it wasn't the right way. But of course, if you were the one who didn't put your pen in your pocket, you have to stay down the bottom while the others run up and down. Everybody would get like they'd take it really seriously. Whereas I just thought it was in fact, I got in trouble the most for laughing too much. Yeah.
In your recruit course or cohort, what was a male-female ratio?
I ended up the only woman, but there was 2 of us to start.
Yeah, right. And obviously, like, were you accepted into the group? Was there any sort of
Yeah. No, I was very accepted into the group. Yeah.
no bullying or anything?
No bullying. I never experienced any bullying within this fire department. I did experience in the beginning some um, some I don't know how to say this. Some kind of like, you know, I was very friendly with the boys but I have strong boundaries. So for me, I never saw any of those boys as a potential for romance. Like that's not my way. That's not how I play life. They were my brothers, and I loved them, but it was a clear boundary for me. But I think there wasn't necessarily that trust from either the wives or from the
Oh,
other,
yeah.
like people who had been there a long time, watching the closeness of our academy. And I remember when I first came out online, there was some like rumors going around me and such on me and such, and they all stemmed from one captain. And I remember being on one. He wasn't on my shift, so we have A, B, and C shift. He was on A shift. And I remember taking an overtime shift when I was on probation, and I had heard that he was saying certain things, and so we put the patient in the ambulance, and then I walked right up to him and I said, "Hey, I know that you've been saying this, 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 and this, and I know that you're a captain, so this may be out of place, but I just want you to know, like, it's not okay with me."
Good.
And I'm pretty sure I said some things other than that, but that was the absolute end of it. And from that moment on, it was smooth sailing.
Nice.
And I just kept my boundaries really clear in place through my entire career, and no one ever hit on me or anything. I was totally accepted as one of the boys. And for me, it was really important to set that standard right from the beginning. I really actually had a really hard time with any of the girl interns or girls that would come in and instigate romantic relationships, because for me, it just it made the whole working environment unsafe. And it meant that then I would have to at times be like, there would have to be assumptions made on what happens between men and women in the firehouse. And for me, it was really important, and part of my values that never kind of came into it. So, yeah. And I think that makes for a really healthy working relationship.
Definitely.
But these men are still my brothers, even after being gone for 10 years. I went back last year and we all hung out and went for
Nice.
drinks. And yeah, I miss them.
So where was your first posting? Straight out of recruit course and onto shift? Whereabouts?
Yeah, so there's something called the detail pool, which is where you're not assigned to a particular station, but you fill the gaps of wherever there's holes that day. And generally when you come out of, no, that's not true. For your first year of probation, you are assigned into a permanent spot. So I was assigned to what's called Station 71. It's probably the busiest station. And I was so lucky. My crew was amazing. So when you're on probation, you have to be the last to bed, the first to get up. You're never allowed to sit down in the recliner for that entire year. So when everybody's sitting down watching TV, you're over studying or whatever, and you do all the cleaning and you make the coffee and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you guys are similar. But that's we work 48 hours on and 96 hours off. So I was in that station and my crew was really laid back. So they would occasionally be like, come and sit down. I would always say no, but they would always try. And my captain is probably one of my favorite people still in the entire department. And just really, You know, he doesn't have a spiritual practice. He's not Buddhist, but he's literally like a walking Buddha. But he doesn't know that.
So what?
And endless energy.
So, like you said, he was an amazing. But what was his qualities that made him that person?
He wouldn't know about the word gratitude, but he's just always seeing the positives. And he, you know, he doesn't talk about emotions though, you know, but he would be there for you no matter what. And just so physically fit and so strong and so full of energy. And you just know, like, he's got your back. And he would never, if you did something that wasn't right, he would be like, hey, let's go out and practice because, you know, this morning wasn't great. You know, it wouldn't be, not a lot of ego, you know. And in a captain, I think that's quite rare. So, and then there was only 7 women in my department, but one of them was on that crew. And her and I are still friends to this day. She came out and visited me 2 years ago. And yeah, we were always best buds. So.
So out on for 12 months there, how does the EMT, EMS stuff come back into play?
Great question. We're never going to get to mindfulness, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a question that I get a lot. So when you show up, let's say you show up to Station 71, and then at Station 71, there's just an engine and an ambulance. And there's 4 people on the engine and there's 2 people on the ambulance. So you roll in and you're like, okay, for the first 24 hours, I'm on the ambulance with Bill, for example, or with Julie. I'm on the ambulance with Julie. And then at 7, because shift start at 7 a.m. 7 a.m. the next morning, Julie and I jump onto the engine and the other 2 jump onto the ambulance. Now, when you're first starting out, you have less seniority. So it may be that, unfortunately for you, you're on the ambulance for 2 days this shift, and then you're on the engine next week. As you gain more seniority, you end up on the engine way more. And then eventually, once you become an engineer, you never work the ambulance again, and captain, same thing. So it's kind of this idea that everybody knows working the ambulance is harder. And so through your career, on you go, and less time on the ambulance until pretty much you don't have to work it at all if you don't want to.
And for you, did your DUI just tick over and then you just started working the ambulance once that had happened?
Well, it didn't matter once I got a fire job because I got that commercial license, and didn't matter. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So I went straight into just being regular. I mean, most people didn't even know I had a DUI, only the people that hired me.
They do now.
Yep.
It's out there. 108, come on. It's only
I'm way too honest. Yeah. So that was the go. And then after probation finished, I went out into the detail pool, and I loved that, just working in a different area every time. That suited my personality really well. And even when I didn't have to do the detail pool anymore, I actually continued to choose it for a little bit longer.
So that's the detail pool. That's just going station to station, right?
Different spot every day, or yep. Yeah. So I just keep all my gear with me.
Yep.
And just move around.
How long did you spend as a paramedic firefighter in the States, all up?
It was only about 8 years. Yeah, because the EMT paramedic time beforehand, and then 8 years. And then, well, that's a whole nother story, what happened there.
Were you in the same department for that whole 8 years?
Yeah, I thought I would just stay there until I retired. I mean, that's how it works there. It's very unusual that people leave. Very, very, very unusual. They may leave to go to another department, but I don't know that I've ever heard anyone who just left.
Yeah, wow. So
it's a pretty cushy job. Like, you're getting paid very well, and you this might be crazy, but our retirement plan was such that you retire at age 50. And you retire each year, you earn 3%. So you would essentially, after 25 years, be retiring on what you earned for the rest of your life.
Oh, wow. So no wonder they don't leave.
Yeah.
They do not leave. No. That's changed a bit since COVID, since I left. But that's. So I will actually receive a pension when I turn 50, which is not that far away.
Very cool. That's something that we obviously don't have here in Australia for any of our emergency services.
No, I know. Yeah,
So
freaked me out.
in that 8-year period, was there points like, often the story with paramedics, frontline workers, that burnout? Was there ever a period where there were jobs you were going to, or the bucket was getting full, or?
No, not through that time period. I was very happy. I was very content. I loved the job. If I was ever burnt out, or not burnt out, but like annoyed, it was more around uh, people at the department
Mm.
or just your general like getting annoyed about things that you realize later. It was just because human beings tend to lack gratitude and focus on the negative. But
Mm.
no, I was very, very, very happy there. It was the working conditions were so good. Now that I look back, the money, the pay, the amount of, I mean, sometimes I was at a station for a year or two where we only ran a few calls in a 24-hour period. And our stations were beautiful. We all had individual beds, and just having that engine time where you're not transporting
Mm.
to the hospital and where you're like, getting to go on fires and throw burning stuff off a second floor balcony. What could be better than that? So
Sounds good to me.
So did you enjoy, which aspect of the job did you enjoy most? Riding the engine or riding the ambulance?
So the answer to that question is I didn't enjoy one over the other. I liked that I did them both.
Yep.
Because of the contrast. If you'd asked me then which one I liked more, I would have said I liked the ambulance more. But I only liked the ambulance because it was essentially part-time. And when I came back to Australia and went full-time on an ambulance, if you'd asked me then, I would tell you, no, I liked being a firefighter. But that was because it was out of balance. So now, with the wisdom I have after all these years, I realized what I liked was that it was a dual role.
Yeah.
And I liked the organization that came with the dual role system because, if you go to a call, you don't have to chat about who's doing what. You know who's doing what based on what seat you're in. If you're sitting in the passenger seat of the ambulance, you know exactly what your role is on that fire. So if you get to a fire, if you're the first ambulance to the fire, you're not a medical, you're fire. So the ambulances, you carry your SCBAs and your gear and your fire, and then you get on, you team up with the engine and you go in as a firefighter. Similarly, if you get to a car accident and you are, back right on the engine, you know exactly your role. And we all know each other. So it's not like being a paramedic in Australia and then having to coordinate with the fire department, with the jaws of life. You don't know this person who's up here in this extremely stressful environment.
Mm.
But there, you all know each other. You're all working together. You all got this total, care for each other. And it is, I hate to say it, a far better system.
Mm.
I say that with the having worked in both.
Mm.
And just, showing up to a medical call with, that many people.
Mm.
And then it ends up being, a serious call and you're just all there so quickly.
Yeah.
Like your resuscitations are just like clockwork, Mm.
There's nothing for here in Australia for a paramedic to turn up on their own,
Oh, it's horrendous.
job.
Yeah, it's horrendous. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
So you
I think paramedics here in Australia are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful
Mm.
people, considering what they have to endure in their
Oh,
workplace.
definitely.
So,
Yeah.
Kate, you touched on that you did work in paramedicine in Australia as well,
Yes.
and you were one of the rare ones to leave. Why did you leave, and
Yeah.
why'd you come back?
I came back from my family. So I had left Australia when I was 18, and by the time I came home, it had been 15 years. And I would come back every, sometimes every year, sometimes every 2 years. And I started to notice that when I came back, I felt less and less like I didn't know these people that were my family. And my brothers and my sister has actually 5 children, and my brother has 4, and then I have 4 younger sisters as well. So huge family, lots of nieces and nephews. And I distinctly remember getting on a plane to go back to the States and just crying because I was waving goodbye to my little nephews and nieces and just thinking, ah. And then I was on a call in the States when I got home, and sometimes you take the family with you in the front of the ambulance. And so there was a woman who was dying of cancer, and we were taking her to the hospital, and her daughter was sitting in the passenger seat, and we were talking, and she was talking about how she was taking care of her mum while she died. And I just thought, it's not a possibility for me if I stay here.
Mm.
And then my stepmom actually got diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. She died of that many years later, but because it came back after 10 years. But and so I just started having a lot to think about. And then I also started meditating when I was 26 or 27 and started sitting these silent meditation retreats in the Buddhist tradition. And it was always there when I would be on retreat that I would start having this really strong, almost kind of like an intuitive voice in my head that was like, go back to Australia. And then I'd go back to work and I'd re-enter my life of I love the firehouse, I love my work, I love all my friends, I love my whitewater kayaking, and then I would just say no. And this process went on for a few years of like getting these moments of clarity of like, go back to Australia, and then my life was way too good, and I'd be like, no way, no way.
Mm.
So then I had a relationship breakup, and I decided I really want to see about this Australia business. And so I booked a trip to Australia in a camper van, and I just had the best time. And I was like, that's it. I'm moving back to Australia. And then I came back to California and I re-entered my life. And I thought, "Oh, I've just got too much of an established life here. Like I've got 15 years worth of furniture. I've got all these friends." And I said, no. And I was at the point of like researching shipping containers and how to get back to Australia. And it all just seemed so overwhelming. And then my house caught on fire one night when I was away. Yeah, and all my stuff was gone.
Wow.
So that was
So I had to-
the catalyst to move back.
yeah. So the house was full of asbestos. So even though it didn't burn to the ground, all of my stuff was throwaway. Most of it was burned and stuff anyway. And I had, this is way too long of a story, but I had coincidentally taken out a renter's insurance policy for a different reason. And so I got paid a payout and I had no stuff. And all I could care about was that because I would leave my dog home when I went for my 48-hour shifts, and he had a doggy door and an auto feeder. And I had him with me the night that the house caught on fire, and the exterior burned, and it burned in through the doggy door actually, and the smoke line was down to the floor. So he would have died. So all I cared about was my dog didn't die, and now I've got no things, and I just knew right away, this is it. This is my chance. And so I asked my chief, who was a woman, if I could have a sabbatical, and the most they would grant me was 4 months. And so I spent almost a year saving up time to make it 6 months. And then I started telling people I was leaving, and everybody was like, "You're not leaving, you're not leaving, you're not leaving, you're not leaving." And then inside, every time they'd say that, I just started to think, you know what? I think I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. But I took a 6 month, I came to Australia, I lived in a van for 6 months. And during that time, I put in some job applications, and but the story is so long, but I do remember that during that time, I went and got my yoga teacher training. And I always had thought, when I retire, I want to teach meditation and yoga when I retire. But I thought that was like 20 years down the track. But I remember being on the beach in South Coast, New South Wales, crying to my mum, did a lot of crying during those years, saying, I think I actually just want to be a meditation teacher now. Like, I don't think I want to go back to this job. But it didn't make sense to me, because on paper and in my logical mind, I loved that job and I wanted to do it. But like in my heart, there was just this like, go do something else. And then I was like, how do you make money doing something else? You know, I'm so well paid, my life's so set up. But New South Wales Ambulance offered me a job as an intensive care paramedic. And I thought, look, why don't I just see? So I called my fire chief and I said, if I take this job and the leave of absence passes, will you hire me again if I come back? And she said, absolutely. You'd have to start from the bottom and go through academy, but we'd 100% hire you back. And I was like, okay. So I took the job with New South Wales Ambulance and off I went.
Wow.
Did they take you straight on? Did you have to do any extra training or additional training?
I had to do a recognition of prior learning. So 8 weeks, I think I spent just basically, I was in with an academy of people coming in, like new recruits. But I would join them for sort of HR stuff, and then they'd kick me out during their trainings, and I'd go sit with a guy, and we'd just do scenarios all day, and he'd just test me all day. And then he went, okay, yep, good. And out I went.
Did it cross your mind to try and go to the fire side as well back in Australia, or mainly just for...
It did cross my mind, but I thought I loved being a paramedic.
Sounds like there's part B to that story. I thought I loved.
Turned out I didn't love it as much as I thought. No, I didn't love it under the conditions. I apologise for anybody listening from New South Wales Ambulance, but that place was horrendous.
Whereabouts were you working? New South Wales?
Let's just say the South, Sydney South, South Sydney.
Yep.
So very busy.
Yeah, very busy. I just want to be careful what I say, but the person that then trained, because I had to spend some time with somebody, and that person I realise now probably had unrecognised PTSD and was a little bit unwell. And the shock of being with somebody who purposely tried to get out of jobs, fudged paperwork, did some really dodgy things. I was just absolutely floored, and I didn't know what to do with that information. I didn't know if I could say anything to anybody, and I definitely spent a lot of time crying on the phone to my mum saying, what is this place? Like in my department in California, if we were at the hospital and we were hearing a call go out in our area, we would literally run out to the ambulance and say, we're taking this job. Because there, the dispatcher's not in charge, the firefighters and the paramedics are in charge. So we tell them, so we could jump on, we'll take that one. So coming from that to a system where people are like trying to pretend that they're still at the hospital when they're actually getting coffee. But why is it like that? Because management is trying to run these guys into the ground. And so it's just this fight. We had over in the States such this lovely, I don't want to stay in the States because many places in the States probably aren't like this, but in my department over there, management and employees got along really well. Also, if there were mistakes made, you kind of knew they'd have your back. Whereas I just experienced New South Wales ambulances, this real mistrust between employment and management and kind of an unhealthy working environment. And also that feel of like just being a number and they don't personally know you or care about you. Or So I ended up there almost 18 months and it just, my mental health just spiraled. I think I missed my brotherhood terribly. And I missed being on the engine, and I just could not cope with. I'm not ashamed to say I could not cope with the back to back nature of the calls. It was just. There was one day toward the end where we got a hanging, and it was horrific, and the family was, just a train wreck. And I came out and I asked dispatch if I could just go get some hot chips. I wasn't hungry. It wasn't about that. It was about just wanting to take a minute, and they said yes. And on the way to get hot chips, they put us on an abdominal pain. And I remember just thinking, these guys don't understand how to take care of their people. You don't need to create mental health systems for employees so that once they're burned out, then they can get help. You actually just need to create good working and conditions, and then nobody ever gets burned out. Like, to me, it's just so clear and so basic. But Australia doesn't seem to have an understanding of how not to burn your employees out.
And I guess too,
it's very simple.
And the environment, such a difference of if you, given the same situation where you were in the States, you still had that engine company to sort of support, here you're working in a partnership on the ambulance, sometimes on your own, but you sort of become a little bit vulnerable, I guess.
Yeah.
In that environment.
Well, it's taken me years to understand. I couldn't understand why I had some kind of psychological injury, which we haven't even talked about yet. But I feel like I do have a good understanding now around, because the jobs I ran in the States were far, far, far worse, far more horrific, just absolutely some horrific things. But the container in which they happened was safe. There's a brotherhood. There was, you could always put your hand up and say, hey, Cap, can I just have 3 hours? And he'd pop you on the engine and put someone else on the end and medic, or you'd say, you know what, no worries, you can go home or whatever. We didn't talk about our feelings. We didn't do debriefs. We probably should have done more than that. But it was more about just knowing that you're safe and knowing that people had your back. Whereas for me here, I'm like, wait, I have to go and see all this, but nobody cares about me and no one has my back. So the container in which these things are happening is not safe. And I think this is an understanding that really needs to start to take place within these organizations. We know what we're signing up for when we're becoming fireys and police and paramedics. We know what we're signing up for. It's not a mistake, and we're willing to see people hanging and decapitated and children who are abused. We're willing to see that, but we want to know that it's worth it. And for me, I'm like, why would I put myself on the line mentally and physically for you people who don't care about me, who don't have my back? And I didn't want to admit that for a long time because I didn't want to be a victim. Like for me, I never took out a comp claim or anything. I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to be responsible for my own feelings, my own healing. And that's no judgments to anybody else. Sometimes I regret that decision, but that was important to me. But there was a period where I had to say, you know what, sometimes taking on that victim archetype and saying this wasn't my fault and there is something wrong with the system is also healthy. And so I did that for about a month once, a few years ago. And I was like, right, that's it. I'm moving on. But yeah, it's not anybody's fault. But currently the system, at least at New South Wales Ambulance, doesn't have, I don't believe, people's backs, and it's not a particularly safe environment. And the proof is in the pudding. The average retention rate is like 5 to 7 years. So.
And, it's something that we talk about often in these podcasts about, PTSI and we speak a lot about moral injury, which seems to be
Moral injury, yeah.
huge. And, we spoke to a police officer in a big shootout and he got chipped for wearing a wrong colour undergarment. And, like you say, it's not the hangings, it's not what we see, it's the lack of that support. And I'd like to believe it's not malicious. I'd like to believe more that it's a lack of understanding.
That's right.
But I think, with all the psychosocial hazard awareness and legislation, that we are going to get better at that.
Yeah. I think it's already on its way, hopefully. Maybe by the time the current younger employees reach management positions, it might be different. But yeah, and moral injury, that's what I've understand, because it's like, in my case, it's as simple as my value was to be a compassionate and kind paramedic, but the working conditions I had did not support that because I was exhausted. And that's enough. That alone is enough to cause a moral injury. It doesn't have to be any more than that, And so in that case, these departments need to know that they're essentially causing moral injury when they can't have their employees living out the values that they want to live out.
And you just stated that in the fact that back in the States, you were going to far more horrific jobs. The call numbers would have been through the roof opposed to what you were probably responding to here. But the difference being the captain said, yeah, go and have a break, or you're always with that crew who, and I mean, I guess something that we probably do here is that rotation of, you could be here one day, one there the next day. So you're not getting that sort of bonding with that crew. You're sort of moving around a lot, which has its pros and cons too, I guess. But the clear difference is just support our people.
Yeah, and just that general vibe. It's not necessarily said, but that general vibe that that the bottom line, unfortunately, and it's not management's fault, say at New South Wales Ambulance, because they're just following directives from above. But the bottom line is how to save money. And that's part of being, there are some really downsides to the way the state's health system works. Like, it's atrocious for people. But the shadow side of Australia's incredible health system is that for the employees, it's always about saving money. And, that's not really working out for us right now because the employees are suffering. And then, the amount of money spent on work cover. I mean, because of the work we're doing now, we know the numbers on work cover. It's atrocious in some areas, like 50% of police on work cover in some areas in Australia. That can't be cheap.
Not at all. Not at all.
So,
Yeah, we've still got a little bit of work in that space to go.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm hopeful.
even,
And I agree, it's not malicious. Sorry.
even on that, Kate, like, yeah, saving money, but like listening to what you're saying, and the two comparisons, it sounds like a little bit more care could fix a whole lot of things, and care doesn't cost anything.
I was going to say, care is pretty
true.
cheap.
Yeah, it doesn't cost anything.
So like if you know that the people above you, management around you, working with you, if you know that they care about you and you know that they're going to have your back if something goes wrong, like that's free. It doesn't cost anything. And I would hazard a guess that would improve things substantially.
Yeah. Well, so that, Josh, is actually the reason that I left. Last night on the ambulance, we went on a call. I won't give you the details, but it was a strange one. And I felt like this particular one of the people on the thing on the call was probably worth me talking to the supervisor about. So I called them up to say, hey, like this, and this just happened. And I kind of have a feeling you might hear from this woman because she's clearly not well. But I just want you to hear it from me in case anything happens. And he questioned me. He said, well, did you do da 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 da? And I said, no, I didn't do that. It wasn't appropriate on the call. And he says, well, actually, technically, you should da 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 da. And I cracked. I was like, I am not going to continue. What if something really bad happened? Is that what this person is going to do? Like I vividly remember being in the States and, a miscarriage is not a medical emergency to a hospital, right? So, but we had this woman 16 weeks pregnant, bleeding everywhere. And I said, I'm not putting her in the waiting room. I'm just not going to do it. And I had this big argument with the hospital, and they said, put her in the waiting room. And I said, I'm not putting her in the waiting room. It's like, can you just put her somewhere back here where she's not going to be bleeding all over a waiting room?
Mm.
And anyway, they called and complained to our management, which is fair enough. But my boss came down there and reamed to this woman. How dare you have a go at our paramedics for trying to do the right thing?
Oh, so this
Now,
was in the
that's what I was
States.
used to, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
And now here I am, and I'm calling up in what I think I'm going to call this guy and say, oh, great, good job. I'm expecting that response, because that's what response I would have had. At this point, I'd been a paramedic 13 years, something like that, 14 years. And I'm thinking I'm going to get backed and I'm doing this great job by calling my supervisor. And then he tells me I've done something wrong. And I was like, I'm done. I am done. And I thought I just needed a break. But so that was the beginning of the night. And then we kind of had the night from hell. And night from hell meaning low acuity, like abdominal pain, vomiting. And I'm an intensive care paramedic, right? I'm not supposed to be going to these calls. But they run the system so low there that even though you're not supposed to, they keep putting you on these calls all night long. And by 4 a.m, I was absolutely shattered. And also, I dug myself a mental hole because I'd been telling myself I shouldn't be on these calls and just getting really angry organizationally all night. So kind of causing my own suffering. However, by the morning, we got this little old lady. She had chest pain. And I was so angry on the way to the call. Like the anger in me was just, and of course I was deeply, deeply ashamed of this position I had found myself in. And I was so angry at this woman that I couldn't even talk to her when I got to her house. And I just told her to get out and get in the ambulance. And then she walked, I'm going to cry, but she walked past me. And as soon as she walked past me, I just dropped onto the floor and started crying because I could see that I had become something I didn't want to be. And it was so painful.
But I think too, you tried to call that out so many times, but felt, or you probably weren't listened to. So not making excuses of the situation, but I'm saying that potentially that was always going to happen at some point.
It was always going to happen.
If it wasn't going to happen with her, it was going to happen at the next job or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's that lack of empathy that
that's right.
You're not
I had
given.
just absolute empathy fatigue. And like 4 months before that, we'd gone on this street racing accident, and it was horrific. And I think something in me that night said, I don't want to do this anymore. But I kept coming because what do? You've got this job, you make this money, you've got rent. You know, I had signed a lease on this beautiful place down in Stanmore Park, south of Sydney. It's paradise. But my jaw started clenching. I'd never experienced a clenched jaw before, so that was kind of like, I don't know, early in the year. And I had started to get more and more and more wound up. And so by this night, I was a train wreck. I was a physical, mental train wreck. And I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't really understand any of this PTSD, et cetera, at that point. And I had a strong meditation and yoga practice. So I was just trying to meditate and yoga my way out of it. I was keeping a gratitude journal. I was all the things you do. And then that night, I just literally couldn't do it anymore. And the partner I was with, thank God, it was an amazing woman that night. I've always just wished I could go back and give her a big hug. I never saw her again. But she said to me, you're done. Like, you're done. And we called employee. I called the management. I said, I just need to go home. I'm sick or whatever. And I went home, and I got home and walked up the stairs. My dog was there. I flew my dog from the States to Australia. And I opened up the fridge to get a snack, and my fridge was broken. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And the next morning, I put all my fridge stuff into an esky because it was all bad. And I thought, it's just such a metaphor. My car was also broken, and my dog also had all this cancer removed from his body, which, by the way, I'm jumping around, but the reason I was on night shift that night that this all happened was because I had called management and said, my dog has just had this huge surgery. I didn't know he had cancer. He had a lump. When the vet went in there, he had cancer all through the side of his body. So the whole side of his body was removed. He was stitched from spine to belly. And I called them and said, I can't come in because I don't have any family. I can't leave this dog. And they said, oh, that doesn't meet the criteria for sick. And I was like, I should have just lied, because that would have worked in my old department. And they said, the best I can do is put you on nights. So I did 4 nights in a row. So this was the 3rd of my 4 nights in a row. And I was just strayed. My car had broken down. The dog had cancer. And then I walked home that night and the fridge was broken. And I was just like, my life. So I organized for my friend to pick up a new fridge for me. And then I found it on Facebook Marketplace. And then he was supposed to pick it up the next day, but then he was too hungover to do it. So then and that he was going to do it the next morning. And then that night, my house flooded.
Oh, man.
Wasn't for bad
But-
luck, you'd have none.
But when I first moved into that house, the neighbours all came over and told me that when it rains, the house floods. And so I had said, I don't want to live here. And I called my landlord and said, and she said, just put it in writing. If it ever floods, you can break your lease and move out. So I put it in writing. If this place ever floods, I'm out of here. So what was that? Just like the fire, it's total out. So I was like, okay, that's it. I'm out of my lease. I'm free. I actually did try to go back to work for a day and then that was it. I was out. So I didn't officially resign, but all my stuff was wet anyway. I just got rid of it and got in the car and drove to my mum's in South Australia and spent 6 months licking my wounds. Mm.
So at this point in the career, is the mindfulness sneaking in somewhere here? Like there's, I mean, if anyone deserves a break, it's definitely you.
At that point, I think I was in such a bad way. I wasn't using mindfulness effectively. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but I think sometimes you can get confused when you take on a spiritual practice that being mindful means that you can just take on all the problems yourself and not draw a boundary externally with conditions that aren't appropriate. That makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah. Like I can fix it, I can fix it, I can fix it. And what I've learned is that mindfulness is not going to fix all of your problems. It's just going to show you what's there. And what I will say that mindfulness has done for me has given me a recovery that I've seen very few people take on a PTSD journey. But it doesn't mean you're not going to get it, because mindfulness doesn't change the circumstances of your life. Mindfulness doesn't mean that you've got a better workplace or that you have better conditions.
Mm.
So that was always going to happen, right? Like those were the circumstances of my life. I left a place I loved to come back to a place that was difficult, where I felt like I had no support, and then went on a few horrific accidents and had a management that didn't back me. So that was always going to happen. So that's separate to the mindfulness practice. But perhaps how it then would have all played out might have been very different.
So back to South Australia, Kate, and you mentioned that recovery journey. What did that look like for you?
At first, it looked like a lot of denial. So I didn't really fully own up to, by the way, I'd never been diagnosed with PTSD. It's a self-diagnosis, but I didn't really understand the full extent of it or start calling myself or identifying with having PTSD until probably almost 3 years later. So at the time, I was just calling it anxiety, and I had very tight jaw, was really kind of high-strung, hypervigilant, had a lot. I noticed that my whole thought process revolved around seeing, I'd walk into a shopping center and I'd just imagine someone dying and I was going to have to resuscitate them, or, picture people dying on the road, or there was a lot of that for me. But I think the first step for me was just being at my mum's and having someone take care of me and just letting go into that. Like that part for me was about going, okay, I'm not okay, and I just need to be okay with not being okay for a while.
Mm.
And also just huge amounts of gratitude that I had a place I could go in the world where I could just be taken care of. Sorry.
So I was going to say, was that back to the hobby farm?
Yeah. I had already got my yoga teacher training I mentioned before. And so I started talking to a friend of mine who'd opened a yoga studio in Sydney. And originally I was thinking, I don't want to stay here at my mum's forever. Like, what am I going to do with myself now? Because I'm a real go-getter type. I probably rushed that a bit, but I decided I was going to move to Noosa, but I was going to drive to Sydney first and catch up with a few friends and then go up to Noosa. But I got to Sydney and the housing I'd organised in Noosa fell through. And then my mate had been like, I've just opened this yoga studio. Did you want to come out and teach a couple of classes? And then my other girlfriend said, oh, mate, do you want to just stay here for a bit? And long story short, I ended up back in that town I was in when I had the breakdown, but moved into a different house and I started teaching yoga full time. So, and I was very unwell, but like I said, there was a lot of denial there around how unwell I was. I think what happens, I understand now, is if you look at PTSD and all the writings about PTSD, there's kind of a lot in there about alcoholism and depression and I never had any of that, I think, which you can attribute to the strong yoga and meditation practice. But what I had was the hypervigilance and the intrusive images and the tight jaw and the, racing mind and all of that. But that meant I didn't realize I had PTSD because I was like, well, I'm happy. Like I've always been happy. Through the whole thing, I've been happy. But there's this whole package of a nervous system and a human animal body that feels really unsafe and all of what comes out of that. So that's something that I'm really passionate about now, is teaching people how to actually look out for the signs in yourself, because it's pretty easy to miss. It's
Mm.
surprisingly easy to miss,
Mm.
especially if you've made a whole lifetime of living like that.
Mm.
Drinking coffee every morning and then whitewater kayaking and then firefighting. And then, if your nervous system's always been up, it's hard to realize that that's actually chronically not very healthy.
Mm. But listening to your situation, I mean, credit to you, because sadly, if someone's suffering that sort of constant, kick in the guts, so to speak,
Mm.
they sometimes will choose in their mind, the easy way out.
Yeah.
And for you yourself, you're always looking for that, I need to repair, I'll do this, I'll move in with mum, I'll get that recovery that I need. Some people
Yeah.
don't get to that stage. It's like,
Yeah.
scarily,
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I made recovery my full-time job. At first, it was just like, how do I get rid of this anxiety? And I started just getting obsessed with what does it mean to be in a human animal body? Like, because I knew the nervous system as a medical person, but what does that mean for us? Like, what does that mean, not for the patients, but what does it mean for us paramedics?
Mm.
What does it mean to have a clenched jaw? Why does that happen? What does it mean to not be able to sleep at night? Like, I'd always been a great sleeper and I still sleep like hell, Well, now it's because I have a baby, and so I got really interested. Even before I started saying I had PTSD, I became so interested in anxiety and stress and tension, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then I did everything. One thing I say to the people I work with now, when they say, oh, I've got PTSD and this, that, I'm like, well, what have you tried?
Mm.
And, most people, this is the problem with going down the work cover journey, is people will only do the things that are paid for. And I'm like, I overshare, but from the time I resigned, I made less than $30,000 a year for the next 5 years, and I still managed to get acupuncture, massage, psychology, EMDR, neurofeedback, changing my diet, getting out in nature, like I threw everything at it, and I didn't care what it cost. So I tell people about the income because I feel like if I share what I did, they'll say, well, I can't afford that. It's like, well, I guarantee I make less money than you do on what they're paying you. But if you want to get better, you just try everything, and you try not to get disheartened about what doesn't work, because I couldn't pinpoint exactly well, there's a few things I could say that definitely helped, but I think it's all of them together that helps. And it's the very act of trying to get better that helps, is my kind of feel. But, I would call myself 99.9% recovered. And it's you just keep going until you don't worry about how long, because when you're in that state of feeling unwell, it feels like you've been that way forever and you will always be that way. But and then it passes and life moves on and it changes.
And just on that, I think another thing we often talk about is someone will bury those feelings because they, in their mind, love the job. And, whereas you just made a clear line in the sense that this is not for me anymore. I'm leaving, this environment and striving in other areas. So,
and this is what mindfulness does. So, when the first place we practice mindfulness is with the body. And, many of us can't feel our bodies. Like if I say, often if I am am I teaching a group and I say, where do you feel sadness? Oh, no, I'm just sad. I'm having, in like this idea, we feel all of our emotions pretty much in the torso, right? Sadness is kind of in the solar plexus and it's heavy and we cry. And then anger is kind of an outward emotion. You feel it in your belly. Anger is, this way. All the emotions are right here in our body. And yet if we're used to living in our heads, because we aren't practicing being present all the time to this body and moving it through yoga and being aware of our breath, then we just identify with our mind and our thoughts and our thinking. So if I had done that, well, I would have kept thinking, well, this is my job and I do this, and I would have kept trying to stay. But because I'm so in tune with body, which is not me, that's the mindfulness practice playing out, you can't ignore your body when it says I've had enough. Like for me, my body was clear.
Mm.
It was tense. The jaw was clenched. It had a heavy feeling, and you can't ignore that. Once you kind of cultivate this mindfulness practice where you're really aware, you can't ignore it and keep going on. And it's like what I see everywhere, and this is what helped me make a clear line in the sand, is how people who have been in the job a long time, and this might be true of police and fire as well, is they just become shut down. So their line in the sand is, I'm going to keep doing this job, and in order to do that, I'm going to have to close my heart.
Mm.
And so they are those people who are really grumpy on calls. I remember going right towards the end, going on a job with another IC, and the guy had died in the gym, and his kids were all screaming. And she looked at me and rolled her eyes, like the kids screaming. Oh, how annoying!
Mm.
And I thought, well, if I'm going to keep going on, I either have to close my heart and be like you, someone who's rolling their eyes as kids are screaming over their dead parent, or I'm out of here. And I knew clearly for me that in this life, my preference is to keep my heart open. So that's how it was a clear, easy decision for me. And then, of course, the other option is to keep working, get PTSD, and then find other coping mechanisms. And this is where we come into, it sounds so cheesy, but it's really true. We come into drinking, we come into shitty relationships with our wives where we yell at them, and then we go through all these, we go through divorce and we blame everybody for our problems. The problem is we haven't addressed what's happening inside.
Mm.
And because it's easy to miss, people can just go through their whole life thinking, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't have PTSD.
Mm.
And we have people that sign up for our program that go, well, I haven't had any trauma, I don't have PTSD. And on day 3, they're bawling their eyes out going, oh my God, because they've just shut down, And that impacts not just work, but every part of our lives.
I remember sitting down with a colleague once, and he just plain out said to me, I don't suffer from any of this. I just do my job, and I don't have any attachment to it. And I just went, that in itself was a concern. Well, he's now out on PTSD, and so they're those signs. You were fortunate enough to have a partner that you said, a work partner that said, hey, you're done.
Yeah.
Was there any other, were family coming to you and saying, hey, you're not Kate, the Kate we remember, or was there any other signs to say, this isn't right?
No, I think I'm such a good coper, and it was really that woman. Like, I'm so grateful for her words, because I still didn't think. I was still trying to keep going, still trying to keep going. Yeah. And, perhaps wouldn't have, well, no, I think it needed to play out that way. Yeah, because I hadn't really broken down yet, so no one had really seen that, I suppose. So, I think of those nights events, and even the way my car broke down and the dog, and it was all just like, hey, get out of here. How many more messages do you want? Get out. So I'm thankful for all of it, for sure. Yeah. But what's really interesting is I actually, my dog died in 2018. So I'd been out almost 2 years, and he was old, so that was expected. But it really crushed me, because he was my he was where you go when you want oxytocin. There's your dog. And I think that's when things for me went from, I'd been sort of coping with working with the anxiety and really managing it really well, but it still required management. So it required me to do yoga every day and meditate every day. And if I didn't do those things, I'd feel unwell. So, that's the phase of like getting better, but you can't, a lot of people don't have the privilege of spending that much time managing themselves. But he died, and so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to pack up and I'm just going to take off. So I put all my stuff in storage again and decided I was going to go traveling for a couple of years. And I, long story short, ended up in the States for a stint. Most of that was through like Indonesia and Thailand, but I went to the States to sit a month-long silent meditation retreat. So at this point, I'd been sitting silent meditation retreats, a couple of times a year for 7 or 8 years, I think. And they'd always been just blissful, wonderful experiences where I felt really well. And this one was the same for the first 3 weeks. It was blissful, wonderful, incredible. And then something happened right at the end of the first week. It had been kind of happening through the retreat and a little bit in Thailand, where I was getting just these little violent images. And they weren't actually memories. They were like, I don't know, when you watch a YouTube video of someone falling off a trampoline and you have a visceral reaction to it or something like that? So it was like my mind was throwing out like a little image of someone getting stabbed and then I'd have a visceral reaction, but it would be over so fast. And I was thinking like, what is that? And this had been going on for a couple of months, but on the retreat one day, it just decided to stay. And that was just happening to me all day. And it was the most excruciating, unpleasant thing I had ever experienced. And I guess I like to think that mindfulness doesn't cause, I'm really selling mindfulness, aren't I? Mindfulness doesn't cause trauma, it shows what's there. And it was like I could no longer hide. I'd been 3 years thinking, oh, it's just this, it's just that. And then I was like, okay, this human animal body is not okay. And I can't meditate it away. It actually needs to be addressed. Like there's a deeper problem that needs to be addressed. I think of mindfulness as a torch that shines the light on like what needs to be addressed. And there was no more hiding. And it was a very unpleasant week I spent there. And then that lasted for about a year, maybe 2. It was really severe for a year. And then it was less severe for another year. And it just drove me to do whatever I could. And one of the most helpful things I did was called neurofeedback, where they put the electrodes on your head, they see what's wrong, and then they basically have you watch movies and it retrains your mind. It's a very, particularly if you're someone with PTSD and you don't want to talk about the calls anymore, it's something where it's just you don't have to talk about anything. Anyway, it worked. It worked actual just wonders for me. And then at that point, I went through a phase where I would I'd be feeling really good for a couple months, and then something would happen, and I'd be unwell for a week or 2, and then the gaps where I felt well extended, and the gaps where I was unwell shortened, and then probably a couple years ago, I did psilocybin journey, and that was the very last time. That would have been 2.5 years ago. That was the very last time I ever had anything that I could describe as PTSD.
Very cool.
So we've had obviously guests that have experienced the same sort of journey and basically give us the same feedback. So
Yeah.
certainly, well, in the hope that it gets recognised somewhere and
Yeah.
they look into it a bit further. But whatever works for people, it's got to be
Yeah.
better than suffering in silence.
Well, the psilocybin was much like a meditation retreat, but instead of having to do a week, you've just got this kind of short period. Because when you do a meditation retreat, you really are. A meditation retreat is where you kind of go and you remove all the things that normally distract your mind, like phones and TV and talking, etc. And then you just sort of do this real kind of gentle. The way we teach it is real gentle periods of sitting and walking and lots of like loving kindness and it's really healing in the sense of you get to kind of experience like what our heart is innately like without all the distractions. And things like psilocybin and MDMA and ketamine, they do similar things. They kind of show us like what's possible inside without our usual kind of thought processes and what we think about life. And, because all of the patterns we have and the conditioning we have from how we're raised and what we believe about ourselves and what we believe about the world, like that's all of our suffering in there, right? So to get a little break from that at times is really beautiful.
So, Kate, we've just sort of stepped us through to that psilocybin experience, and then from there, you said, consider yourself 9% recovered. If you don't mind, can we step back to the States? Because you said that you started your mindfulness meditation practice then.
I did, yeah.
Can I ask why? Like, what was the catalyst and what drew you to that? Was that something that was like pre-existing in you that you had an interest in, or was there something that made you sort of start or turn towards that?
Yeah, no, I had no interest, Josh. Actually, I was so hell-bent against spirituality. Like, I was one of those people that was like, oh, I hate yoga. Like, why do they make you breathe like that? All I was interested in was like partying and like hardcore whitewater kayaking, like dangerous hucking off waterfalls styles. And I hated yoga and I hated being still. Like I couldn't be still. But I noticed that, so I was in my second relationship at that time. I'd been married, I was in a second relationship. And I noticed that even though the details are different, problems were the same. So it led me to believe, oh, this is not him, this is me. Like this is the same patterns of dissatisfaction that are showing up. And then I also noticed when I first got that job at the fire department, I was so appreciative and blissfully happy. And now I was like complaining about this. And so it's just this level of unhappiness that I started to realize I had to take ownership of. Like, I'm always unhappy. It's not about the circumstances, but it's me. You could give me the best circumstances, and within a year, I could transform that into like the most, this is horrible, right? And I was confused as to why that would be, and I'd never heard any philosophies that addressed that. And then I picked up a book that my boyfriend was 14 years older than me, and he had friends who were kind of spiritually inclined, and he had a book on his bedside table, and I read it, and it was called The Wise Heart by Jack Cornfield, who is the man that started Spirit Rock Meditation Center in California. And I was reading this book, and I honestly, if there are past lives, I just had this sense of I know this. I've never heard this information before, but I know this, and I know it to be true. And I was like, okay, I'm going to meditate. And I had a CD in the back of the book, and I put that CD on, and I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to be enlightened. And I shit you not, within 2 minutes, the inside of my body felt like it was going to explode. Like, that's how much I hated being still. And yeah, I was so determined, and I just kept persisting. And it was like sitting for 3 minutes, 5 minutes at first, and just like, wanting to scream to get up. And so I've always, there's nobody in the world that can tell me they can't meditate. I won't believe them. And I'm like, if I could do it, you could do it. Like, don't give me that excuse. In fact, if you feel like you can't, that means you actually should.
It's funny you say that, because having those conversations with people generally, about meditation or whatever, that's a pretty common response that I've found is, oh, I can't do that on my.
Appreciating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would anybody do that to themselves?
So I guess with that in mind, if that's what most people sort of, or a lot of people sort of have that same experience that you had,
Yep.
How do you go about that? Is it just persistence?
It is persistence, yes, sort of. But you know what? It's about understanding what we're doing, because most people have a difficult time because they think they're trying to stop their mind from thinking. And then they have a sense that we all innately have such a sense of like not being good enough. And so we sit down to meditate, we think it's supposed to be a certain way. And when it's not that way, we innately have a sense of failure. And this is happening unconsciously. People might not be thinking, oh, I'm such a failure, I'm so shit at this, but that's what's driving the frustration and the difficulty. And once I realized that I don't have to have a quiet mind to meditate. I could just sit here and notice a distracted mind. I don't have to be feeling peaceful to meditate. I could just sit here and notice that I'm really anxious. And if I'm okay with whatever is, then it's not an unpleasant experience. And like, this is it. This is the whole point. Like, much of what I've said today, people would be like, well, why would I want mindfulness if it's going to open me up to PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that we are living with our heads in the sand about what life is, and that we can't control life, and that life is full of difficulties. And sometimes we pick a profession that doesn't serve us, or we pick a wife who cheats on us, or our mum dies when we don't want it to, or our child dies. And this is the reality of life. And what mindfulness does is trains us. People think mindfulness is about being peaceful, about sitting cross-legged on the floor, but it's not. It's about going, I can train my mind to turn toward whatever is here, whether it's good or not, whether I like it or not. And it means that we turn towards things that are unpleasant more often. But then it means that when shit hits the fan, we're like, I know how to do this. I can be with this. I can take a breath. I can stay with whatever is. And that's how we heal from PTSD, because PTSD is really unpleasant. And if we know how to go, okay, I can be with this. When my mind is fractured, when my body feels like shit, I can be here, and I'm just going to breathe with it, and I don't need it to be different. And I'm just going to be patient, and I'm going to keep soothing this animal body until it feels okay and feels safe again in this life. And it takes a lot of time, because the animal body got really scared. That's why it has PTSD. And if we can just keep being with that, most people's tactics when they get PTSD is avoidance, and even avoidance in healthy ways. Like, I'm not talking about drinking or drugs, but like avoidance in like, I'm not going to turn toward this. This is not a judgmental statement. Medication has saved my husband's life for other reasons. It's saved many people's lives that I know, and I would never recommend someone stops taking the medication. But also at some point we need to turn towards what's difficult, and we need to kind of grieve who we were before. And we need to say, who I am right now is okay. If I'm always like this, it's okay. I can be with that, and I can love myself just as I am now. And then when we do that, the animal body settles and it goes, okay, it's safe here. And then it heals, and then we actually can. People have this idea that PTSD is permanent. I've heard therapists say this. I hate it when they say that. It is not permanent. Nothing is permanent. And the idea that it's permanent is doing a huge disservice to people. You can never undo what you've seen before. You can never change the course of your life, but that doesn't mean you will always be afraid of it. Like I'm living proof that you can feel really safe and well again. And I believe it, and this is counterintuitive, it's from being able to turn toward what is difficult and come to peace with the symptoms that we have that allows the healing,
So
And a
like
lot of the healing stuff we do is an attempt to get away from those feelings. I go to psychology. If I can go to psychology, I can get rid of this. If I do this psilocybin, I can get rid of this. For me, it was more about understanding. I wanted to understand. And the mindfulness mind is the one that wants to understand and wants to see what's really happening here. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to close your heart? What does it mean to keep it open? And I think people that get PTSD, I think that's a huge compliment, and they should be proud of themselves, because it's those people that choose not to close their heart and choose to see into the truth of life that get PTSD. They're saying, no, this violence in Afghanistan is not okay. It's not okay. I'm not gonna compartmentalize that as okay and move on with my life. Like, it's not okay. And their bodies and my minds are searching for answers to something that they can't make peace of. And that's healthy. Like, we should all have PTSD. It's actually, to me, unhealthy if you don't, if you're not affected by war and violence and suffering. Like, there's something wrong, So how do we support people to leave environments where they no longer feel safe? And how do we support that healing journey? I think that's what's important.
Through that, you mentioned, a couple of different words like meditation practice, and then mindfulness has been a big thing that you've been touching on as well. Can I just ask, are those two the same thing, or are they separate, or a bit of both?
You ask really good questions. Yeah. Okay. So meditation is the act of sitting down essentially and trying to do something. And that doing something might be to, there's all kinds of meditations, aren't there? There's relaxation meditations where the purpose of meditating is to relax and maybe even go to sleep. There's concentration meditations where you're trying to make the mind whole. Like, our mind is often quite fragmented with multitasking in our heads. And so yoga meditations like that. Most yoga-based meditations are about stilling the mind and getting the mind to be concentrated and whole. You might do that by mantras or running the breath up and down your spine. Mindfulness is about, you could do this either as a meditation, so formal mindfulness. You could sit down and cross your legs, and then you're turning your attention towards whatever is happening. So mindfulness has concentration in it. So you might begin mindfulness by being present to the breath, or being present to some body sensation, or present to sound. But mindfulness also extends out to start to notice, what are my patterns of thinking like? What am I believing to be true or not? What does it feel like to have an emotion go through my body? And so you can also practice mindfulness informally. So you might say, okay, I really want to be present to the process of eating, and I want to contemplate, where does this food come from? And what does it become when it is, this was an apple, but now what is it? This form of apple died, and now it's reincarnated as part of my body. And this starts to clue us into the truth of life. We all think we're separate. We think we're like an individual being. But if you really start paying attention with mindfulness, you can see that really there's more of a flow of experience. And we're all just different configurations of earth matter, right? Even science backs us up now. We're just configurations of elements, and we die and then we're reborn, and the trees become the animals and the animals become the trees. And this starts to give us a more wholesome, more realistic view of life, where we can't just forward everything we want. And, our problems are universal. Humans all experience them, and we're not isolated and alone in our depression. And I don't know, that was a bit of a roundabout answer, but how do you feel about that?
No, good. So is Is mindfulness more of like a state of being more attentive and being more present? Is that like
Yeah.
a simple way to?
Yeah. Well, John Kabat-Zinn, who started the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and this is the program that we've adapted and that we teach to frontline workers now for PTSD recovery and prevention. He defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose to the present moment with curiosity and without judgment. And I would like to add whether we like that moment or not. So it is a state of being present. Like right now, if I say to you, can you notice your next breath in and your next breath out? And you do, right? And I could always say to you, okay, don't notice your next breath in and your next breath out.
It's impossible.
And you still do anyway, don't you? Yeah. So mindfulness is always there. It's always available. Part of the word, the Pali word, which is kind of the ancient language of the Buddha, which is where mindfulness comes from Buddhism. Of course, that being said, ancient cultures all around the world were also mindful. It's not like it's a new concept. But the Buddha really pegged mindfulness as a way to look into the suffering of life. Buddhism is really, it's not really a religion. It's more like a psychology around how the human mind creates a sense of self and a sense of suffering, and using that information, how we can be happy. So that word sati has an element of remembering in it. Like if you translate that word to English. So it's like my awareness is always available. Like, we can be aware in any moment. It's just that we don't remember to do it. So mindfulness almost has like a verbness to it. Like it's a doing, like we're remembering to be present. Like we're using that capacity to be aware in life, to be present, which is by contrast to what we normally do, which is to live on autopilot, right? Like our brains are so clever and they wire, they say that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're used to doing a certain thing or used to thinking a certain belief, then that's the thing, it's the path of least resistance that your mind will do. And so we just live on autopilot. We think on autopilot, we believe on autopilot, we act on autopilot. Mindfulness gives us the chance to say, well, hold on a minute. I'm going to investigate these habitual actions and I'm going to investigate these habitual ways of thinking by intentionally being present to what I'm doing all day so that I have the possibility of changing my life. Because if we're not mindful, as much, you set a New Year's resolution and then when does that ever work, right? Like, or our partners desperately need us to change for our marriage to pan out. And we try, but we can't. So it's like, how do we really have, okay, I'm just going to can I give you a little Buddhist teaching?
Sure.
Let's do it.
So the Buddha taught that to be born means that we're going to die. Right? We can't escape death. We're going to grow old. We can't escape aging. As much as we want to, we might get fake boobs, might get a facelift, we might keep our hair. I'm super grey, but there's blonde in there, can't let go, right? We're holding onto this body that's definitely going to age. We get sick. And, unfortunately, the body's nature is to get sick. We can't escape illness. But when we get sick, we think something's wrong, right? Or why did this happen to me? But it's just happened to a body. All bodies get sick. And then we get what we don't want, and then we don't get what we do want. And every body that we love will be separated from us. It's just how it is. And so to be born means that those things are going to happen. We can't escape them. And to actually turn toward that and be like, oh, this is how life is. It's almost like if we contemplated that we've only got 1 minute to live, what would be important to us? It's kind of like that vibe. If we actually turn towards these things that sound depressing, but then we really see life for what it is, it kind of gives us the chance to be more clear about what's happening. Because the fifth thing that the Buddha said, he said that every day we should contemplate that. And then the fifth thing is to contemplate that whilst we can't change any of that, what we do own, and the only thing we own, are our actions. So how we choose to do this life, how we choose to be present, what we choose to say, how we look into our patterns, all of that is what we can't control anyone else, but we can choose what we do.
I've got my own little theories. So
Yeah.
I thought about this and I thought, let's say when we were born, you're given a date. On this date, your life no longer exists. You're going to die. I think we would look at life so differently. Whereas I think for a lot of people, it's that fear of the unknown. Like, oh God, I got this lump today. God, I hope it's not cancer, and then they go into this big spiel of this big sort of spiral of, if it's cancer, I've got to go. I just think if you were given a date and then said that's your date of death, you would do things. Well, I think I would do things so differently. I wouldn't stress so much because it'd be like, well, that's part of life. We're all experiencing it. In actual fact, it is. Apart from us getting a date given to us, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's right.
I just think, just with society the way it is, and everyone's in a rush to.
Well, maybe that would, if that was the case, Jace, that would force people into that acknowledgement and that acceptance of, like, of death. Like you're sort of saying there, Kate. Like to be born, you're going to die. Well, maybe if you had that that thing, it would force that frame of mind.
Then you've got a choice. I can either sit in the couch all day and worry about that date, or I go and do things, which is what life should be anyway. But because we don't have the date, we're all just like,
we can forget about it. We can shelve it and go, it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it's
we
not going to happen.
And we shelve our family members that are dying or unwell as well. Just get them out of the way, so we don't have to look at that unpleasantry. The whole idea is, that the Buddha taught. I'm really scared about being religious because it turns people off, but it's where mindfulness comes from. But the idea is that as humans, and you know what, I'll talk out actually from a modern neuroscience perspective. As human beings, we have evolved from getting away from what's dangerous and moving towards what's pleasant, right? Basic human biology. Those that walked past a rustling bush and said, oh, it's probably just the wind. Well, they got eaten by the tiger and they died out. Those that walked past the bush and were a bit hypervigilant and went, oh, it's probably a tiger, escaped, and they evolved. So we literally have evolved from anxious people with a negativity bias. And we don't want what's unpleasant, and we want what's pleasant. And our whole life is about that. We're like beavers making a dam. This is why we're like, and it's not a problem, and you can't stop it. It's just what happens. But it's when it's unconscious that it causes a lot of problems. And if you look around the world, this is why we're in the trouble we are, because people are like, they need a bigger, better house. And we don't actually need to live the way we're doing. We could live so differently, and our planet is so much better off. And it's like mindfulness gives us the opportunity to say, oh, hold on a minute. I'm not even paying attention to the good things that are in front of me. I'm just trying to get more good things, and I'm just trying to avoid suffering. But, am I actually drinking this coffee? Like, have you ever gotten to the bottom of your coffee cup and you're like, well, who drank that? Like you just, and then you're seeking another pleasurable experience because you weren't present for that pleasurable experience. So then you got to go get something better, and then you got to go get something better. And, have you ever paid attention to like a warm shower? Like, it's a freaking miracle. If you've ever lived somewhere without a warm shower, which I have, it's like you get a hot shower and you're like, well, whoa, this is luxe, So it kind of runs rampant. There's not, and this not wanting to be with unpleasant. But the biggest part of that, particularly if we're looking at a trauma perspective, is that we also run from unpleasant emotion. So we think when we're happy, when we're joyful, we think, oh, something's really right here. This is great. Everything's okay. And then this whole spectrum of PTSD emotions comes up, like fear, shame, like so much shame in a PTSD experience. And then we actually just don't want to feel those. And that's where avoidance comes from. Whereas mindfulness is the number one tool, I believe, with getting us to go, okay, here's the package of emotions that are here, and what are we going to do about them? Not drink them away. Medicate them until we have some more resources to turn toward them. All of that. Because we should, I think the medicating until we have resources is very wise.
So, Kate, through that journey, you said, you had those practices established, the mindfulness, your meditation, gratitude yoga, all that sort of stuff. And you said that you felt that those things stopped you from turning to like other perhaps coping mechanisms such as alcohol and drugs and whatnot. In terms of meditation, you mentioned before that there's lots of different types. Were you practicing any one particular sort of type?
Such a great question. Yeah. Yeah. So there's just mindfulness in general, which I practice a lot of, and that's just kind of being with whatever's there. I practice that a lot. But I noticed interestingly, I had all these years experience before I had PTSD. Yep. So I know what meditation looks like before PTSD. But then because I had got PTSD, I kind of then, meditation is totally different when you have that, because it's scary to sit and meditate when your body doesn't feel safe. So I'd say what helped me to really, and it's such a blessing having PTSD, because it opened up this whole other world of meditating in different ways and playing with different meditations to see what was really healing and what was really helpful. And I'd say for trauma and PTSD, probably the best kind of meditations you can do is like ones that are really steeped in kindness and softness and tenderness and care. And or the other one that really helped me kind of right towards the end was I would visualize a safe place. And I actually had a safe place. I went on this retreat once to this place in Byron Bay. It's a spiritual center. It's absolutely incredible. And one morning I woke up early and the sun was rising. It was red. I just had such a feeling of well-being. And then I came home and went back into a sort of like a bit of a PTSD thing for a few months. And I started doing that. It was actually a therapist. It was such a bad regression. I went to see a therapist for a while, a new one, and she had this tool, and she pulled me off the ledge with this. Oh, has there been a place recently where you felt really safe? And it was that room. And I think for like 6 months, anytime I felt unwell, I would just visualize this room and the sunrise and the feeling of well-being I had. And also like kind of shows you the power we have to create a space in our mind that affects our whole body. And in loving, it's called loving kindness, this particular meditation that also comes from the Buddhist tradition, but is really big in the mindful self-compassion world and the MBSR world, is we can actually sort of send kindness to beings. Often with people with trauma, you'll choose something like a dog or a cat or something like that. And you just sit there meditating and you just send love. And there's heaps of guided meditations that can kind of guide you if you don't know how to do it. But you know, there's actually research now that shows that the hormone oxytocin heals trauma. And they've done studies with the synthetic oxytocin. However, when we're meditating, we actually create that hormone ourselves. And so knowing that oxytocin heals trauma, and this is where equine therapy comes in, or support dogs, they actually create a sense of oxytocin for people with PTSD. So we can create that same thing by doing these safe space meditations, by doing these kindness meditations, literally wrapping that sense of unsafety in our body with kindness and care. And it's actually pretty revolutionary for people. I remember on one of our 8-week program, we run these 8-week programs with 3-night retreats. And he won't mind me saying this because he's coming back to do the program for the 3rd time. But one of the guys, I love him to bits, the first retreat he came on, he sat there at the end with his hand on his heart and he said, I didn't know I could love myself. And so he was Afghanistan war veteran, first 8-week program or retreat, that was his realization. Then he's done another one with us, and then he's coming up to do another one. And his entire life has changed. His entire life has changed through doing these 3 programs. And that is not an uncommon experience. That is extremely common. Is that, and this is where modern medicine falls short, because no one has yet approved love as a treatment for PTSD. But I think that's where we need to go, And it's hard to get people to buy into that, But if you think about it, trauma happens in the absence of safety, in the absence of care, and in the absence of love, right? That's where it happens. And so it makes sense that it's the reintegrating a sense of safety and care and love that is healing.
Mm.
That's my personal opinion, that one. That's not like I pulled that from research. So that's just my soapbox. Don't quote me on that.
No, I love it. Yeah, love it. You mentioned your the program that you run. Should we shift gears and talk a bit about that and what that looks like?
Yeah, favorite subject. I just returned from a retreat in the Northern Territory. So I've done a 4-year Insight Dharma training. So this is a training to become, this is a Buddhist training to lead the silent meditation retreats. So I finished that right before my son was born. And in that program, there was a woman named Lisa. And quite early, I think in the first year of the program, we ended up in a Zoom room together. And I was sharing this, I really want to just help frontline workers. That's all I want to do. And she was like, I already work with frontline workers and I'm a psychologist, but I really want someone who is a frontline worker and has experience, and we should team up. And she was an MBSR facilitator. MBSR is mindfulness-based stress reduction. And that's the pretty much the only form of mindfulness that's been heavily researched. It's been researched since the 70s, and there's heaps of data. So insurance companies love it, governments love it, and it's basically the Buddhist teachings with all the religion removed, essentially. And so I went to do the training because I wanted to secularize my language. I wanted to take. I love the Buddhist teachings, and the way I teach always had sort of that religious connotation. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to go into working into these sort of public sectors, I need to take that out of my language. And so I did the MBSR training. It was really good training, actually. And then we adapted that MBSR program for trauma recovery so that we thought it would be really safe and really effective for trauma. That was a bit ballsy. We took liberties there, but we felt like there was integrity if we brought a researcher along. So we ended up wanting to do that program on our own, and I reached out to Frontline Yoga in the middle of reaching out to a whole bunch of organizations. I didn't know Frontline. I'd just seen them on the internet. Reached out to them to see if they would help us share this program that we wanted to run. And originally we were just going to run it at a price, people would pay for it. And I got an email back from Frontline Yoga, and I recognized the name. And it was a girl I'd gone to yoga teacher training with all the years ago. So we were friends.
Wow.
So I was like, wait, you're Frontline? And so then she said, well, actually, I've got a better idea. We're going for grant funding. Would you run this program with us under this grant funding? Can we pitch your idea? And we said, hell yeah. And so they wrote a grant, and the DVA funded it. And then so we ran our first workshop in New South Wales back in 2021 or 22, and did it on grant funding. And originally the idea was for frontline workers, but the DVA were extremely generous in saying run for veterans. If we couldn't fill with veterans, we could fill the rest of the spots with frontline workers. So that's how we came to doing that. So that program's been running ever since. 2 programs a year usually. This year we've got 3. So we're in the middle of the second one now, and the next one starts next month. And unfortunately it's full. So we don't have any more spots, but we've put in for next year Tasmania, WA, and a 5-night retreat. So we're hoping we're going to get that, because everybody that comes out of the program either wants to do the program again, or most commonly, because the retreat on the program is only 3 nights, they all want a longer retreat. Everybody wants a longer retreat. So we're putting in for a 5-night.
That's awesome. So you said you brought a researcher on board. What sort of outcomes are you having from running these programs?
Should have had the research ready, shouldn't I? Look, I can only recall off the top of my head, so this may be incorrect, but I do know for sure that we get a 50% reduction in PTSD symptoms. So that one I remember. Can't remember the exact numbers, but we get a pretty high increase in self-compassion. Overall well-being, I think, is also something like a 50% increase. It's across the board. It's incredible. And we're getting pretty much identical results with every program, even though they're with completely different people in completely different locations. So it seems like it's across the board. It seems like it's across the board life-changing. Like, I feel very confident in saying that. Like, it's a life-changing program.
Mm.
That's awesome. And I think early on when you sort of touched on this, you said it can use preemptively as well as like post-injury as well.
Absolutely. We call it mindfulness-based trauma recovery and prevention, and it's for any current or ex-serving frontline worker or vet or defence member. So you could even be like, we have mental health nurses that take it. We have dispatchers. We have anybody, and we don't ask anybody to say why they want it, or they don't have to have trauma. I would say we would probably even let in like a family member if they felt like it would be really beneficial to understanding the partner. Like, we're pretty, we just want to help whoever thinks they need to be helped, and we let them decide if they need to be helped. Mm. Some people even take it for professional development. Like, they're like me. They've been a frontline worker. They're now a psychologist, and they want to know how they can help their frontline worker clients more. That's like, maybe we might have one of those per session or something like that. And I love that. I love having that in there. Like, to me, frontline workers and they only really want to take advice from people who have been a frontline one. They don't want to go to a psychologist who doesn't. They don't want to. Like, and in my opinion, the trauma world is rife with just teachings about complex childhood trauma. And I I don't relate to that. I don't have I mean, I have my own definitely childhood traumas, but I I relate to having vicarious ongoing trauma from being in the front lines, and I want my instructors or my psychologists to understand that and what that's like, and that's really hard to find. So it's another one of mine and Lisa's missions to try to find people who want to give back, who also have on the ground experience. Yeah.
That's cool.
Mm.
How do people find these programs, Kate, that you're running?
Mm.
Like, how do we access it and apply for them and stuff like that?
Okay, so I have a website, and I have so interestingly, many months ago when we all talked about doing a podcast, you had asked me then, how do people do these practices? And I said, oh, there's really nothing for them. And so I went home and went, why is there nothing for them? Why am I not offering like an ongoing, like, sure, we're doing these 8-week programs, but why am I not doing something ongoing? So since that time, I've created something called monthly mindfulness, and it's specifically for frontline workers. And it's mostly at the moment filled with people who have done the program, but anybody could do it. So that's the first Sunday of every month, and that's on my website. It's an hour and a half. It's all trauma focused for restless people like us frontline workers who don't sit still. So it's a little bit of yoga. We do like a theme. I'll give a 5 or 10 minute spiel on a theme, and then a bit of yoga, and then we meditate together. The 8-week programs are on my website, and they're also on Frontline Yoga's websites. Same with monthly mindfulness. I actually run that through Frontline Yoga. And then I also decided to start a Tuesday night. We call it a Sangha, so it's a Buddhist group, and that runs every Tuesday night. And it's not just me giving talks; it's all the teachers that came out of that 4-year program. So that's another resource for people as well. And because we're kind of a younger group, I think younger teachers just have more of a trauma focus anyway. So it's, I think, suitable for anybody. So frontlineyoga.com.au is the resource you'd go to apply, or my website is kateduncanyoga.com, and everything I do is on there. I've got like a whole page that has free yoga and meditation and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
So
sweet.
Kate Duncan Yoga or .yoga?
kateduncanyoga.com.
.com.
Yeah,
It
cool.
really should be kateduncanmeditation.com, but changing your website is just really excruciating. So
That's good. You can add that to the show notes as well.
Yeah,
Cool.
yep. So if anyone's interested, they can click the link in the show notes. Kate, I'm interested to know, now that you're on the other side, preferably the other side of this stuff, do you think it was beneficial having those practices moving through this journey? Yeah, and would you advocate for other people to have these practices, I guess, on the front end, particularly in these careers? Like, would that be advantageous for us to start venturing into mindfulness, meditation, yoga and stuff, as opposed to post-injury?
Oh, yeah. No, yes. I think it's just, it's like, to me, it's the most important part of life. If we want to live our life out of denial, and if we want life to be meaningful, and if we want our life to be full of love and care and good relationships and less drama, then I think it's essential. And particularly as a frontline worker, so much of the big questions in life, I think, are right in front of us if we want to take them up, because we see such a, we see, like, other people can bury their head in the sand about what goes on out there, but I think a frontline worker cannot. And yeah, and I think it's really beautiful to be able to ask those bigger questions and make sense of them. I think the reason that I got PTSD is just because my heart is always been really vulnerable and open. And maybe it wasn't, maybe it was only ever going to be a temporary career for me. And I'm okay with that. Like, for a while I was kind of ashamed of that, but I'm okay with that. But for each of us, I think having a mindfulness practice means that we know those things. We're aware of those things. Like, for me, it was like, okay, it's time to go. Like, but for somebody else who isn't like me, and that wants to stay in the whole time and has the capacity to do that, then they can use these practices to just soothe and know when it's time to say, have a week off and go over to Bali and have a holiday. Or, and they also can, and this is probably the most important thing, know how to not let seeing those things at work close down the rest of their life, to see the impact it's having on their wife and their family and their habits. And, I think a lot of us can get into the habit of compartmentalizing, but we don't just compartmentalize at work, we do that at home.
Mm.
And if you've got your wife and your kids at home and you're compartmentalizing with them and you're blowing off difficulty, it's not healthy, and it leads to like unhappy marriages and divorce, etc. And that's what I see a lot in people who say they don't have PTSD or they don't have trauma. There's other parts of their lives that are falling apart. It also means that you can prevent injury. So why that didn't work for me is because I teach at the uni in Adelaide. There's two parts to preventing injury. One is being aware of what's happening. I had that. Two is knowing what PTSD is, and I did not have that. I never heard PTSD in reference to my workplace. Like, I only thought PTSD was something that veterans got. We never, ever talked about it. Like, it was never a thing. We didn't really even critically debrief. Like, I had no concept of it. It wasn't in my wheelhouse. So whilst I was like, what are all these things happening? I was then going, oh, it's anxiety, it's this, it's that. If I'd had an education, much like we give, I'm teaching mindfulness to paramedic students at Flinders Uni here in Adelaide. So we're giving them the awareness. Hey, this is what PTSD is. This is what it looks like. And then I give them mindfulness, and this is how to know about it. Because I see that as the failure in what happened to me. Because if I had known what PTSD was, I would have resigned after that first accident where my jaw started to clench. Or I would have not resigned. I would have just said, hey, can I have a month off? And then, who knows, I would still be there, et cetera, et cetera. But really, for me, the breakdown was going from a place I loved to a place I didn't like, and the deeper desire to be a meditation teacher. For those of you who are just, I'm going to be a firefighter forever, then these tools are invaluable in figuring out how you're going to do it in a healthy way for the rest of your life. And when you retire, how are you then going to go, okay, now what? Who am I now? Because there is a huge loss of identity when you let go of a police hat or a fire hat or a ambo hat, and because practices will help you deal with that.
That's awesome.
It's from all of that, what you just said, like this practice might allow you to be more aware and more conscious across more areas of your life. Like you said, your family or other relationships or work, whatever it is, you're more conscious and aware of what's happening around you. And then if you couple that with the understanding or the education, like you said, then you actually are able to do something about that.
And also able to do, so this is also what I tell the paramedic students is also don't get into that habit of spiritually gaslighting yourself. Mindfulness should, if done right, also give you the capacity to walk up to your boss and say, these working conditions are not good enough. And I can tell because I'm doing mindfulness right now and I can see that my nervous system is really up, and I need you actually to change these conditions so that I can relax. Like, there's also that. And that's the part I was also missing. And it was part of being a new employee and not knowing, like, how I could stand up for myself in that environment. But so there's also, like, sometimes when we take a meditation practice, we can sort of take on the responsibility of things. That's a kind of a misunderstanding of the practice, if that makes sense. So, yeah. But all in all, it's like, it means the mindfulness and it means that we're taking a life and we're learning from it rather than just like walking through life and, then we die. Yeah.
If someone's listened to this, Kate, and perhaps they're still a little bit skeptical, or they're it doesn't work for me, or whatever it is, what's one bit of advice you could give to someone who may be of that mindset, apart from just do it?
Mm-hmm. Mindfulness these days is a lot like, we call it mindfulness. Like, if you go to McDonald's, you might get a sense that food is a certain way and you're like, that's not for me. But it's only because it's shallowly understood. So if you do a little bit of mindfulness and you think it doesn't work for you, it's probably just because you haven't done enough, or you haven't found the right teacher, or you don't really understand what it is.
So I listen to that. So I just got to keep pursuing with McDonald's and eventually...
No, find some better nutrition food.
Damn.
Get a better meal. Go to the best restaurant in Brizzy, and then you'll be like, oh, wait, food is great.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, I love the way that I mean, love the way. For me, listening to your story, you were given so many signs that often people will get signs and they ignore them. Where you were given so many signs, and you're very courageous, for one, to move away from your family home to go and live in the States and do all these things. But it almost feels like to me your life has been mapped out, good or bad, as in, unfortunately, you had to suffer some of that mental anguish. But for where you are now, do you think that experience has helped?
It's I just love it. I think it's the best thing ever. And I tell this to my people with PTSD. Like if you get, and I say if because the way that the common system thinks about PTSD is that they're not going to get through it or something. But so with the way that what we're offering is that there's a path to actually get through and be healed on the other side. And not only will you feel well again, but you're going to be so much better, because it's those of us that have been through suffering and healed it that have the most compassion and the most understanding and the most humility. Like, it's really humbling to think that you're really amazing at this job and at that job, and then you can't do it anymore. And you have to find this sense of humility around, well, what does my life look like now? And then on the other side, you're just so much more understanding and compassionate and kind. And then I also feel like I have a happiness now that is unshakable and unbreakable, because it's not dependent on having good circumstances. It's dependent on a deeper sense of well-being that doesn't need the world to be perfect. I've let go of hope that I'm ever going to be younger or prettier. Like, we all have this unconscious hope running through us that life's going to get better. Well, it doesn't get better. We actually just get less broke as we get older, and we have more responsibilities and less time, and then we lose our bodies and die. But I'm happy anyway, because that's life. And I don't, do you know what I mean? Like, I've got an unshakable happiness, and you get that through suffering. You get that through seeing life as it really is and saying, you know what, that's okay. Life is absolutely horrific, and it's also just completely full of beauty and generosity and kind people and amazing feats. And I'm going to focus on that. You know?
Nice message.
Beautiful. I think on that note, Kate,
Mm.
we might pull it up.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
It was well worth the wait, I can say that, Kate. It was, some really nice messages in there for everyone, for those listening. And I'm sure everyone that listens will, get a lot out of that. I think the main thing is that you brought the attention to the PTSD, and that, I like the spin that you put on that with, people with PTSD have got an open heart, or so that's everyone should have PTSD in our role. Well, it's a nice spin. I think,
It's not a failure.
No, and it leads people to think that it's okay, I'm okay then. Whereas, like you just said, a lot of people will shut that out because potentially they're not going to be okay. But you've soon proven to all of us that you can definitely be okay.
Too good. Thank you so much for your time today, Kate. Like we said, the links to your website, your Frontline Yoga website, we'll chuck in the show notes, so if anyone's interested. And I also know you are on social media as well, so we will plug you.
I am on social media, but I would say I'm pretty inactive these days. But yes, I am. I am on social media.
Is that another way that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I may not answer messages very quickly on social media, but through my website, they can send me an email as well.
Okay.
Nice.
Perfect. Thanks again, Kate.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please show your support by subscribing, liking, and rating the podcast on your listening and social media platforms. We are always looking to improve what we do. If you have feedback, suggestions for further guests, topics, or would like to be a guest yourself, please contact us via Instagram.